The gold-plated wedding invitation was sent directly to my base. A taunt from my younger sister Cordelia. After 6 years of being outcast by my own family, she wanted me to return as a sacrifice for her perfect performance. And no one expected this wedding to end with blessings. It would end as a debt to be paid. The perfect wedding invitation lay on my desk, cold and sharp. It wasn't an invitation, but a summons back to the place from which I had been exiled 6 years ago. The name Cordelia was embossed, proud, and unfamiliar. Yes, it was my sister's wedding. I hadn't seen her, or anyone else in my family, since my father's funeral. 6 years of silence, not because I was stationed far away, but because of betrayal. The memory of that day was still vivid. At the time, I was commanding a top-secret operation abroad. Everything had to be kept confidential. No mistakes were allowed. Just then, a major newspaper back home published an investigative report accusing my unit of causing civilian deaths. The article relied on an inside source, and it mentioned a very specific detail: transmission error. I knew immediately. Only one person knew about that error. Before I left, I had called Cordelia. During the conversation, I complained about it. A small, trivial detail, but undeniable proof of who had stabbed me in the back. The mission was top secret. I couldn't speak, couldn't explain. Admitting my presence there would have been treason. I had to remain silent, accept an internal investigation, to protect a secret greater than my own honor. My father was a judge. He understood the weight of those secrets. He was heartbroken not because his son was falsely accused. He was horrified to realize his daughter had used the most despicable means to destroy her brother. The betrayal from his own blood, not a public scandal, killed him. At the funeral, as I, in my military uniform, approached the front row, my mother, Eleanor, stopped me. In front of all our relatives, she stated directly, "Your scandal and suspicious silence killed your father. From now on, don't desecrate his name by bearing the Thorn name anymore." That was an expulsion. I left and never called back. Now, this card lay here. A challenge. Cordelia wanted me back to witness her triumph. She wanted me, the stain on the family, to be present to serve as a backdrop for her falsely pure wedding. Initially, I intended to throw it into the fire, burn the past, and continue with my life. 6 years was long enough to learn to live without the Thorns' approval. But when I looked at my father's photo on the desk, I knew I couldn't do that. I wasn't returning for them. I was returning for him, because the truth about his death was still buried beneath their prestigious facade. This debt had to be paid. The invitation wasn't an invitation. It was a battlefield. And I had never refused a battle. The Thorn Mansion hadn't changed. It was still as grand and cold as I remembered. As I stepped into the grand hall, the cello music, half played, faltered. Dozens of eyes immediately turned to me, and whispers began to spread. I didn't need to hear to know what they were saying. The scandalized guy, the outcast son, why is he back all of a sudden? Cordelia, resplendent in an expensive wedding gown, approached. Her smile was perfectly practiced, but her eyes couldn't hide her contempt. "Brother," she said, her voice artificially sweet, "I didn't think you'd come." "You sent an invitation," I replied, my voice even. My mother, Eleanor, also came closer. She merely gave a fleeting nod. Her eyes swept over me as if I were an unwanted piece of furniture, but just for a fleeting moment, I saw something else in her eyes, an old pain, a struggle she had tried to bury. Then it vanished immediately, replaced by her usual hardened expression. "Thank you for coming," she said. But it was actually a warning. "I hope you understand. Today is not a day to draw attention." "I understand," I replied. I understood my role here very well. From a young age, I had been the prodigy, the hero in my father's eyes, while Cordelia always felt she was just the other one. My military career, though they disdained it, inadvertently drew attention to me. In Cordelia's eyes, I was the wall between her and the recognition she craved. Destroying me was the only way for her to shine. When the dinner party began, it was no surprise that I was seated at a secluded corner table. Cordelia sat at the main table, and it wasn't long before she raised her glass. Her eyes swept across the ballroom, then stopped at me. "My dear brother," she said loudly, with a sneer in her voice, deliberately making sure everyone could hear. "Do you still remember how to use a knife and fork? This isn't a battlefield." A few guests chuckled awkwardly. I didn't react. I calmly picked up my knife and fork, cutting a piece of steak. Every action was slow, controlled. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me angry. Declan Hayes, the groom, whom I had once saved in Ramadi, looked uncomfortable. He placed a hand on Cordelia's arm, whispering, "Cordelia, don't be like that." Cordelia immediately turned, her voice sharp. "Are you defending him?" she hissed, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I did as you wished, invited him here. And now you're defending him in front of everyone? Do you know he's the reason this entire family has been a laughingstock for years?" Declan fell silent, his face showing clear conflict. I continued my meal. Every move, every word was noted by me. This wasn't a party. This was a public interrogation. And the main act hadn't even begun. The tension at the main table thickened. Declan sighed, putting down his knife and fork decisively. The sound of metal hitting ceramic echoed in the suffocating silence. He turned to Cordelia, his voice no longer a whisper, but a serious plea. "Cordelia, can you stop? He saved my life in Ramadi. He deserves respect, at least on our wedding day." Declan's words were like a slow-burning bomb. The entire table was stunned. Cordelia's face flushed red with anger and shame. Being betrayed by her own husband right in front of the high society she always craved to conquer was an unbearable humiliation. My mother, Eleanor, immediately intervened, her voice as cold as ice. She didn't look at Declan, but directly at me. "Declan, don't cause more trouble. As for Silas, don't think that just because someone owes you, you have the right to break the family's reputation." I remained silent, but my hand tightened around the stem of the wine glass. Veins bulged, the only sign of the intense pressure building inside. I didn't look at them. I was observing the large glass doors, the escape routes, the faces in the crowd. An old habit, or perhaps a preparation. The main act began when Cordelia stepped onto the stage to give her speech. She had regained her complacency, even more determined. This was her chance to regain control, to quell Declan's words with an even grander performance. She raised her champagne glass, smiled at the crowd, then turned towards me. Her voice, amplified by the microphone, was full of thinly veiled bitterness. "And of course," she said, "I can't help but thank my only brother, who traveled a long way to be here. A person who is always present in places no one wants to remember, and participates in things we can never talk about." She paused for a beat, letting her words sink into the air, twisting into the wound she knew I couldn't explain. "You truly are a master of secrets, especially dirty secrets." A few awkward laughs echoed. Declan shot up, trying to snatch the microphone, but Cordelia took a step back, evading him. She had to complete this sacrifice. Humiliating me was her way of proving to the world that the Thorne family was clean, by pushing all that was dirty onto me. I stood there, motionless. I no longer heard the laughter, no longer heard her words. I only heard the sound of breaking glass. That sound wasn't in my head. For the first second, before all skills activated, I was just an ordinary person frozen by the piercing sound of breaking glass and desperate screams. The acrid smell of gunpowder filled my nostrils. The chandelier lights twinkled on millions of shards of glass falling like a deadly rain. I saw a guest's face contorted with fear, saw a champagne glass fall and shatter on the floor. It was a second of pure chaos. A second where the luxurious high society world collapsed into hell. Then, like a switch being flipped, everything slowed down. Sounds faded, leaving only data. My brain began to analyze. 6 men in black, armed with assault rifles, burst in. They moved professionally, disciplined. This wasn't a regular robbery. This was a targeted attack. Everyone down. Throw your phones out, one shouted in broken English. Within seconds, chaos was replaced by paralyzing fear. The esteemed guests, people who had never faced real violence, knelt on the floor, hands over their heads. The leader, a large man with a long scar running down his cheek, scanned the crowd. He wasn't interested in expensive jewelry or designer wallets. His gaze stopped at the main table. He yelled in a foreign language that both Declan and I immediately recognized. Arabic, Iraqi accent. Pay the debt from Ramadi. Everything became clear. This was revenge. And we, the officers from that battlefield present here, were the ones who had to pay. Declan's reaction wasn't one of stunned surprise, but of deadly recognition. He immediately looked at me, and in that moment, a henchman swiftly darted onto the stage. He grabbed Cordelia, who was still frozen with the microphone in her hand, and pressed a gun to her temple. A hostage, a leverage. My brain had switched to combat mode. I was no longer Silas Thorne, the outcast guest. I was a commanding officer. I swept my gaze around, analyzing. 6 enemies. Weapons. AK-47. Formation. 4 controlling the crowd, 1 holding the hostage, 1 leader. Position. They had blocked the main exits, but they had missed the service entrance behind the stage. A mistake. I lowered my voice, giving a brief command, loud enough for those kneeling near me to hear. Stay silent. Keep your heads down. Don't look directly at them. My voice carried a weight that made them obey unconditionally. On the other side, I saw Declan steal a glance at me. He was looking for guidance. I responded with an almost imperceptible nod. A silent signal. Wait for orders. Don't act alone. I slowly stood up, hands raised high. The leader immediately pointed his gun at me. Who are you? He roared. I am her brother, I said, my voice calm, my eyes fixed on him. What do you want? Money? We can negotiate. I didn't call the police. Calling the police now would panic them and endanger the hostage. I needed to buy time. I needed more information. I needed them to make another mistake. The conversation was just a facade. The real battle had begun in my head, and I had found their weakness. I don't need money, the leader snarled. His AK-47 still pointed directly at my chest. I need the life of that dog, Declan Hayes. I quickly glanced at Declan, giving him a visual cue. He understood immediately. It was an old tactic we had used in Fallujah. Be the bait. Draw attention. Declan slowly stood up, hands raised high. It's me, he said loudly, his voice full of defiance. Let the innocent go. Your debt is with me. As expected, the attention of the 4 guards immediately shifted to Declan as he began to step out. The leader also turned, a sinister smile spreading across his face. He had gotten what he wanted. That was the 3 seconds of vulnerability I needed. I didn't hesitate. With a swift movement, I used all my strength to overturn the long buffet table nearby. Plates of food, wine glasses, and silverware crashed down, forming a temporary shield between me and the 2 nearest guards. At the same time, I grabbed a bottle of liquor from the table, pulled out the cork, and forcefully splashed it onto the large burning candelabra on the stage. A whoosh sounded. The alcohol vapor met the flames, erupting into a small fireball, not enough to cause serious injury but enough to startle everyone into a panic. In that moment of chaos, I lunged. I lunged through the temporary shield, reaching the 2 still stunned guards. The first one hadn't even recovered his senses before I locked his arm, twisted it behind his back, and used his own body as a shield. An elbow strike to the back of his neck, and he collapsed. The second one barely managed to turn around before I used the butt of the rifle I had just disarmed to strike him hard on the temple. He fell back, unconscious. At the same time, Declan also acted. Seizing the opportunity, he charged. But the kidnapper reacted faster than expected. He didn't hesitate to fire a warning shot to cause panic, and at the same time, shoved Cordelia towards Declan. Declan was forced to switch from offense to defense, extending his arms to embrace Cordelia and spinning around. A sizzle sound echoed as a bullet grazed Declan's sleeve, leaving a scorch mark and a stinging burn. The pain made Declan roar, but he didn't retreat. He slammed his shoulder into the kidnapper, sending both of them sprawling. The gun flew out. Cordelia was safe, but screaming in terror. The leader, seeing his subordinates falter, furiously aimed his gun at me. He pulled the trigger. I felt a sharp pain in my left shoulder as a bullet lodged itself, but adrenaline masked everything. Before he could fire a second shot, a bullet from the pistol Declan had just grabbed hit his gun-holding hand, making him scream and drop his weapon. Silence enveloped the room. Everything happened in less than 15 seconds. I wasted no time. I advanced to the guard I had knocked down, snatching his internal radio. I didn't call 911. I switched to an encrypted military communication channel. "This is General Thorne," I said, my voice sharp. "Authentication code. Victor Alpha 6. There's a hostage situation at Thorne Manor. 6 subjects. Neutralized. Request assistance and scene lockdown." Over. In the deadly silence that hung over the room, my voice still echoed. The whispers had completely died down. The faces that had once looked at me with disdain, now only showed utter bewilderment. Some covered their mouths, trying to hide their shock. A few hours ago, they had gossiped about the family's shame, the scandalized officer. Now, they were trying to process an unbelievable truth, but my gaze wasn't on them. I looked at my mother. Eleanor, who Declan was helping to her feet, was completely stunned. She looked at me, not as a stain, but as a stranger with her son's face. General Thorne. That title was like a hammer blow, shattering the proud wall she had built for the past 6 years. The one she had exiled, the one she believed had been buried in a disgraceful scandal, couldn't possibly be a general. But that voice, that authority, that authentication code, they were real. And then, as if to confirm the impossible, distant sirens wailed, growing louder and louder, tearing through the night and the silence of the ruined party. Power had completely shifted. Half an hour later, Thorne Manor had become a makeshift command center. Police car lights flashed, painting the marble walls red. FBI agents in windbreakers had taken over the scene. I was sitting in an ambulance, letting a medic tend to my shoulder wound. It wasn't deep, but enough to remind me that perfection only exists in plans. Through the open vehicle door, I saw a senior police officer, an old acquaintance named Captain Miller, approaching. "General," he said, his voice full of respect but also undisguised curiosity. "Didn't expect to meet you in these circumstances. Your report is very clear. But we'll need a formal statement." "I understand, Captain," I replied. My gaze swept past Miller's shoulder. In a corner of the grand hall, under the cold lights of the investigators, I saw my family. Declan, with his arm bandaged, stood protectively over Cordelia, who was huddled on a chair. Beside them was my mother, Eleanor, her face pale, her eyes staring into space. Their perfect facade had been ripped apart, and now they were just witnesses, victims, being interrogated like everyone else. Miller followed my gaze. "A long night for the Thorns," he muttered. "We'll arrange a private room for your family after the preliminary statements." I nodded. The play wasn't over yet. The real confrontation had just begun. After all the procedures were complete, in my father's library, amidst mahogany bookshelves and ancestral portraits, only the four of us remained. Declan stood by the window, his back to us, giving us privacy. My mother sat motionless in an armchair, her face expressionless. Cordelia, her wedding dress now wrinkled and stained, stood in the middle of the room trembling. She didn't dare look at me. I broke the silence. My voice was even, devoid of emotion. "I knew it was you," I said, looking directly at her. "That article, it mentioned transmission error, which I only told you about on the phone." Cordelia flinched, finally looking up at me, her eyes filled with panic. I continued. "Father didn't die because of a scandal. He died knowing his daughter had used the most despicable means to destroy her brother." Cordelia let out a laugh, a desolate and crazed sound. "You're making it up," she hissed, clinging to her last facade. "You hate me, so you made up this story to destroy me. You have no proof." "I don't need proof, Cordelia," I said, my voice cold as ice. I no longer looked at her but turned to Declan, who stood silently in the corner of the room. "But perhaps you should ask your husband if he believes it. Ask him what a soldier would think of a traitor." This attack wasn't aimed at Cordelia, but at her last support. Cordelia's eyes desperately sought Declan, looking for an ally, but all she received was silence, and a look of disappointment and disgust from her newlywed husband. That was the real finishing blow, not my accusation, but the silent judgment from the person she most wanted to impress. All of Cordelia's arrogant, complacent layers shattered. She collapsed to the floor, her desperate sobs echoing throughout the room. She confessed everything through her choked sobs. My mother closed her eyes. She didn't cry. Her silence was more terrifying than tears. I didn't need to say another word. A life debt was an undeniable one. I looked at them one last time. A shattered mother, a broken sister. There was no anger left, only an emptiness, exhaustion. The battle was over. The debt has been paid. "Both debts," I said, my voice deep and resolute, not to them, but to the ghost of my father I had left behind 6 years ago. The debt of gratitude and the debt of honor. I once thought family was a place to return to. It turns out, it's just another battlefield, where people stab you in the back. Then I quietly turned and walked away. This time, I wasn't the exiled one. I was the one choosing to leave, leaving them to face the naked truth and a family that had crumbled from within. As I walked out of the library, Declan was still standing there. He said nothing, just stood at attention and saluted. I returned the salute. No more words were needed. We understood each other.